Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're journeying back to 1920s Germany, to a remote farmstead called Hinterkaifeck. The name itself, meaning behind the woods, paints a picture of isolation, and it was here that one of Germany's most chilling and unsolved mysteries unfolded. But before the horrific events of March 1922, a shadow had already fallen over this place. To understand the crime, we must first understand the family and the unsettling atmosphere that surrounded them in their final days. Hinterkaifeck was home to the Gruber family. The patriarch was Andreas Gruber, a man in his 60s known in the nearby village of Kaifeck as a tough, domineering, and often unlikable figure. Living with him was his wife Cecilia, a woman who seemed to live in her husband's shadow, often described as devout but worn down by life. Then there was their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel. Her husband had been killed in World War I, leaving her to raise two young children on the farm, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph. From the outside, they were just a family trying to make a living off the land. But within the walls of Hinterkaifeck, relationships were deeply troubled. Whispers and rumors had followed the Grubers for years. The most persistent and disturbing of these concerned Andreas and his daughter, Victoria. Villagers spoke of an improper, abusive relationship between them. A rumor that was so strong it even led to a court conviction for Andreas. He served time in prison, and Victoria was also punished. Little Josef, Victoria's youngest child, was rumored to be Andreas's son, not her late husband's. This dark secret cast a long, oppressive shadow over the family, isolating them even further from their neighbors. They were a family set apart, bound by secrets and shame. The farm itself was a character in this story, located a full kilometer from the nearest road, surrounded by dense woods. It was a world unto itself. To get there, you had to leave the main path and venture deep into the countryside. This isolation meant that the Grubers were largely self-sufficient, but it also meant they were alone. If something happened, hell was far away, and it would be a long time before anyone noticed. This remoteness, which once might have offered privacy, was about to become a terrifying vulnerability. The very woods that hid their secrets would soon hide a predator. Just 6 months before the tragedy, the family's long-serving maid, Maria Baumgartner, abruptly quit. Her reason was chilling. She told people she was leaving because the house was haunted. She claimed to hear strange noises, disembodied voices from the attic, and footsteps when no one was there. She was convinced that spirits roamed the halls of Hinterkaifeck and fled in terror. The Grubers, ever practical and perhaps too proud, dismissed her fears and hired a new maid. But Maria's departure marked a turning point. The strangeness she reported was only the beginning. The unseen presence she feared would soon make itself known in terrifying ways. In the days leading up to the end of March 1922, the unsettling events escalated dramatically. It all began with a set of footprints. Andreas Gruber discovered a single set of tracks in the fresh snow, leading from the dense forest directly to the farmhouse. He spent hours searching, circling the property, looking for the corresponding tracks leading away from the farm. Found none. It was as if someone had walked out of the woods, entered their world, and simply vanished into the buildings. Who was it, and where did they go? The thought was deeply unnerving. An intruder wasn't just near. They were somewhere on the property. The next strange occurrence happened in the attic. The family began hearing noises from above, footsteps shuffling back and forth, faint sounds that couldn't be explained. Andreas, armed and wary, went up to investigate. He searched every dark corner, every dusty space under the eaves. He found nothing. No person, no animal, just a cold, empty attic. Yet, the sounds persisted, an auditory torment that suggested someone was living secretly just above their heads, listening to their every conversation, watching their every move. The feeling of being watched, of not being alone in their own home, must have been suffocating. Then, a newspaper appeared. It wasn't a local paper or one they subscribed to. It was a newspaper from Munich, found lying on the porch. No one in the family had been to Munich, and no one could explain how it got there. Was it a message? A sign from the intruder that they could come and go as they pleased, leaving little tokens of their presence? It was another piece of a terrifying puzzle, a deliberate act designed to unsettle them, to let them know they were being observed by an unseen and unknown entity. Perhaps the most practical and frightening discovery was the missing house keys. One morning, Andreas realized that a set of keys to the house had vanished. He searched everywhere, but they were gone. Now, the intruder didn't even need to force their way in. They had a key. They could enter the tool shed, the barn, even the house itself. At any time, the locks that were meant to keep them safe were now useless. The family was trapped, their last bastion of security breached. The psychological toll of these events must have been immense. They were prisoners on their own farm, haunted by an invisible tormentor who was growing bolder with each passing day. Andreas shared his growing fears with a few neighbors. He recounted the story of the footprints, the noises in the attic, and the missing keys. He was clearly disturbed, a man who was used to being in control now, facing something he couldn't understand or fight. Yet, despite the obvious danger, he refused to leave or call the police. Why? Was it his stubborn pride? A belief that he could handle the situation himself? Or was it something else? Did he know more than he let on? Did he suspect who might be tormenting him? And was it a secret he was unwilling to share with the authorities? His refusal to seek help remains one of the most baffling aspects of the case. The final day, March 31st, 1922, arrived with a deceptive sense of normalcy. It was a Friday. The new maid, also named Maria Baumgartner, arrived at the farm in the afternoon to begin her first day of work. She was just 44 years old, and her sister had walked with her part of the way before seeing her off. This new Maria was walking toward her new life, completely unaware she was also walking to her death. For the Gruber family, it was the day their quiet terror would finally erupt into unimaginable violence. The unseen presence that had been lurking in the shadows, listening from the attic, and walking in the snow was about to reveal itself in the most brutal way possible. What happened next would cement Hinterkaifeck in the annals of true crime history. The footprints in the snow, the sounds in the attic, the missing keys, they were all a prelude, a slow, menacing drumbeat counting down to a night of slaughter. The family, isolated and terrified, was picked off one by one, lured to the barn under the cover of darkness. The perpetrator knew the farm, knew the family's routines, and moved with a chilling confidence that suggests they had been there for some time, living alongside them, hidden in plain sight. The shadows that gathered over Hinterkaifeck in the spring of 1922 were not supernatural. They were born of human darkness, of secrets, abuse, and a simmering rage that finally exploded. The eerie events leading up to the murders are not just clues. They are a chilling narrative of a family being stalked and psychologically tormented before their final, violent end. What happened here 100 years ago has become one of the most chilling and perplexing unsolved crimes in history. In the dead of night, an entire family of 6 was brutally wiped out, one by one, with a simple farm tool. The victims were Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia, their widowed daughter Victoria, her 2 young children Cecilia and Joseph, and the family's new maid, Maria Baumgartner. For months leading up to the tragedy, strange and unsettling things were happening around the farm. Andreas Gruber told neighbors about finding a set of footprints in the snow leading from the woods to the farm, but none leading back. He heard footsteps in the attic and found a strange newspaper that he'd never bought. The house keys disappeared. It was as if someone was living in the shadows of their home, watching them, waiting. Despite his unease, Andreas never went to the police. He was a man known for his secrecy and stubbornness, traits that may have sealed his family's fate. The night of the murders, Friday, March 31st, 1922, was a cold one. The new maid, Maria, had just arrived hours earlier, stepping unknowingly into a death. The killer's method was systematic and brutally efficient. It seems they lured the family members into the barn, one by one, perhaps under the guise of a problem with the livestock. Andreas was likely first, then his wife, Cecilia, followed by their daughter Victoria, and her young daughter, also named Cheese. Each was struck down with a pickaxe. Their lives ended in an instant of shocking violence. Back in the house, the youngest member of the family, 2-year-old Josa, was asleep in his crib in his mother's bedroom. The maid, Maria, was in her own quarters. The killer entered the house, moving silently from the barn. They went to Maria's room first, killing her in her sleep. Then, they moved to Victoria's bedroom and ended little Joseph's life. As he lay in his bassinet, the brutality was absolute. 6 people, 3 generations of a family, gone in a single night of unimaginable horror. What's even more disturbing is that the crime wasn't discovered for 4 long days. The family was known to be reclusive, so their absence wasn't immediately noticed. The younger Cecilia didn't show up for school, but it wasn't until the mailman noticed the mail piling up on Tuesday, April 4, TH, that a search party was organized. Neighbors, led by a man named Lorenz Schlittenbauer, entered the farm. The scene they discovered was something out of a nightmare. The first thing they found were the 4 bodies in the barn, stacked and covered with hay. Inside the house, they found the maid and the young boy, both murdered in their beds. The entire farmstead, once a place of life, had become a tomb. The investigation that followed was fraught with challenges from the very beginning. The crime scene was immediately contaminated. Neighbors had moved the bodies, touched everything, and unwittingly destroyed crucial evidence before the Munich police even arrived. Early forensic science was limited, but investigators did make some key discoveries. Autopsies confirmed that a pickaxe was the murder weapon. Strangely, the older Cecilia's body showed signs of strangulation, though the cause of death was blunt force trauma, like the others. Perhaps the most baffling discovery of all was the evidence that the killer didn't just flee after the murders. They stayed. This is where the story takes its most terrifying turn. The killer remained at Hinterkaifeck for several days after the massacre. The search party found that the livestock had been fed. The cattle were milked, and meals had been eaten in the kitchen. Someone had even been stoking the fire to keep warm. Imagine the audacity, the sheer, cold-blooded nerve of living in a house surrounded by the bodies of your victims, carrying on with daily chores as if nothing had happened. This detail transforms the crime from a simple act of violence into a psychological horror story. The killer wasn't just a murderer. They were a phantom who had integrated themselves into the family's home, both before and after their deaths. The police were stumped. Who could have committed such a heinous act? The initial theory pointed towards robbery, but that was quickly dismissed. A large amount of cash was found untouched in the house. This wasn't about money. This was personal. The investigation then turned to the family's complex and troubled personal lives. Andreas Gruber was not a well-liked man. He was known to be domineering and had a history of incest with his own daughter, Victoria, for which they were both convicted. This dark secret led to whispers and rumors in the village. Could the motive be rooted in this family dysfunction? One of the prime suspects was Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor who led the search party. He had been Victoria's lover and was widely believed to be the father of her son, Joseph, though he publicly denied it. His behavior at the crime scene was considered odd. He seemed to know exactly where to look and handled the bodies without hesitation. He also made strange comments in the following days. Was it possible he committed the murders in a jealous rage or a dispute over the child? He was investigated intensely, but no conclusive evidence could ever link him to the crime. Over the years, the list of suspects grew to over 100 people, but the case never got any closer to being solved. There were theories about wandering vagrants, vengeful ex-farmhands, or even a political assassination, but none held up to scrutiny. One tantalizing clue emerged decades later. The skulls of the victims, which had been taken for examination after the autopsies, were lost during the chaos of World War II. However, in 2007, a German police academy took on the case as a cold case project. Using modern investigative techniques, they re-examined all the evidence, documents, and witness statements. While they could undefinitively name the killer due to the passage of time and lack of physical evidence, they did come to a consensus on one individual being the most likely perpetrator. But out of respect for living relatives, they have never publicly named this person. So, the mystery endures. Who was the ghost of Hinterkaifeck? Was it a neighbor hiding a dark secret? A jilted lover? Or a complete stranger who stumbled upon the isolated farm? The fact that the killer could live among the dead, tend to the animals, and then vanish without a trace is what makes this case so deeply unsettling. The farmstead of Hinterkaifeck was demolished a year after the murders, erased from the landscape as if to purge the memory of the evil that took place there. All that remains today is a small memorial, but the story lives on, a chilling reminder of how the deepest darkness can hide in the most ordinary of places. It's a puzzle with missing pieces, a ghost story rooted in terrible reality. The 6 victims of Hinterkaifeck have never received justice, and their killer's identity remains one of Germany's greatest unsolved mysteries. It is a case that has everything. A web of suspects so tangled it is nearly impossible to unravel. Family secrets that could shatter a dynasty, and scandals that rocked a community to its core. What began as a tragic event quickly spiraled into a whirlwind of accusations, false leads, and shocking revelations. Get ready, because this story is a masterclass in how an investigation can go completely off the rails. So, who was at the center of it all? At first glance, the family seemed perfect, pillars of their community. But as detectives began to dig, they unearthed a deeply dysfunctional world hidden behind closed doors. We're talking about explosive arguments, secret affairs, and betrayals that ran deeper than anyone could have imagined. Suddenly, everyone in the immediate family had a potential motive. Was it the estranged spouse, seeking financial gain or bitter revenge? Or perhaps a sibling, consumed by a lifetime of jealousy and resentment? The police were overwhelmed, with each family member pointing the finger at someone else, creating a storm of conflicting alibis and stories. And just when you think it couldn't get more complicated, the circle of suspects exploded outwards. The investigation uncovered a secret lover, a passionate and jealous figure who had been spurned just days before the incident. Their threatening messages and obsessive behavior put them right at the top of the list. But they weren't alone. A disgruntled former employee, fired under mysterious circumstances, also emerged. This individual had vowed to get even, and their knowledge of the family's routines made them a credible threat. Investigators were now juggling multiple high-priority suspects, each with a compelling reason to commit the crime. Then, things took an even stranger turn. A tip led police to a military deserter who had been hiding out in the area. This person was desperate, armed, and known for unpredictable behavior. Had they stumbled into the situation by chance, leading to a tragic, unplanned confrontation? Or was there a hidden connection that no one had yet discovered? The military deserter theory added a layer of randomness and fear to the case. The community was on edge, wondering if a dangerous drifter was in their midst. This new lead pulled valuable resources away from the other suspects, further muddying the already murky waters of the investigation. The media, of course, had a field day. Every new development, every scandalous rumor, was splashed across the headlines. The intense public pressure only made things worse for law enforcement. They were accused of incompetence, of focusing on the wrong people, and of letting the real culprit slip through their fingers. The family, already grieving, found their private lives exposed for the world to see. Every secret, every past mistake, became public knowledge. This media frenzy created a circus-like atmosphere, making it nearly impossible to separate fact from fiction. Witnesses changed their stories, and new eyewitnesses came forward with fantastic, often contradictory, claims. As the weeks turned into months, the theories became more and more wild. Was this a simple crime of passion, or was it something far more sinister? Some investigators began to suspect a meticulously planned revenge plot, orchestrated by someone who had been wronged by the family years ago. They looked into old business deals gone bad and forgotten personal feuds. This theory suggested a cold, calculating killer, someone who had waited patiently for the perfect moment to strike. The idea that this was a long-conceived act of vengeance sent a chill through everyone involved. It meant the killer wasn't just angry. They were methodical and patient. Another prevailing theory was one of pure madness. Could the perpetrator be someone with a severe, undiagnosed mental health issue? Someone who acted on a sudden, violent impulse with no logical motive. This theory was terrifying because it meant the crime was essentially random, a tragic intersection of lives with no rhyme or reason. It also made the suspect incredibly difficult to profile. How do you catch someone whose actions aren't driven by greed, jealousy, or revenge? This possibility left the community feeling helpless, as it suggested that anyone could be a potential victim of a similar senseless act. Then there was the obsession theory. Investigators explored the possibility that the crime was committed by a stalker, someone who had developed an unhealthy fixation on a member of the family. They combed through social media, old letters, and personal journals, searching for any sign of an unwanted admirer. This theory painted a picture of a suspect living in a fantasy world, whose obsession finally boiled over into violence when their advances were rejected. It was a deeply disturbing scenario that highlighted the hidden dangers of unwanted attention and the dark side of unrequited love. The police had to consider that the killer might not be a known enemy, but a silent stranger who had been watching from the shadows all along. With so many suspects and so many conflicting theories, the investigation ultimately stalled. Evidence was mishandled, leads grew cold, and key witnesses became unreliable. The case file grew to an unmanageable size, filled with dead ends and speculative reports. The dozens of potential culprits: the jealous lover, the angry sibling, the vengeful employee, the unstable deserter, the obsessed stalker, all eventually faded back into their own lives. Though forever marked by the suspicion that had fallen upon them, the family was left shattered, not only by their loss, but by the public airing of their deepest secrets, and the knowledge that the person responsible was still out there. To this day, the case remains unsolved, a haunting monument to chaos and confusion. It serves as a stark reminder that sometimes the truth isn't just hard to find. It's buried under an avalanche of lies, secrets, and scandals. Imagine this. It's a cold night in March 1922, on a remote Bavarian farmstead called Hinterkaifeck. A family of 6, spanning 3 generations, is about to be brutally murdered. But the most terrifying part, the killer might have been living with them, hidden in the attic, for days, maybe even weeks, before the slaughter. This is the story of Hinterkaifeck, a case that has baffled Germany for a century. The victims were the Gruber family, Andreas and Cecilia, their widowed daughter Victoria, and her 2 young children, Cecilia and Joseph. The 6th victim was their new maid, Maria Baumgartner, who tragically arrived just hours before her death. For days, no one noticed anything was wrong. The younger Cecilia hadn't shown up for school, and the family missed Sunday church. But on a remote farm, that wasn't immediately alarming. It wasn't until April 4th that neighbors went to check on them. What they found was a scene of absolute horror. 4 of the family members, Andreas, Celia, Victoria, and the elder Cecilia, had been lured one by one into the barn and killed with a pickaxe, a common farm tool. The murderer then went inside the house and killed the 2-year-old Joseph in his crib and the maid Maria in her bedroom. The scene was chillingly methodical. After the crime, the killer didn't just flee. They stayed. They fed the livestock, ate meals in the kitchen, and slept in the house for several days, all while the bodies lay in the barn and inside. Who could commit such a monstrous act and then calmly live alongside their victims? This is where the mystery deepens. Before the murders, strange things had been happening. Andreas Gruber told neighbors he'd found a set of footprints in the snow leading from the woods to the farm, but none leading away. He'd heard footsteps in the attic and found a newspaper that didn't belong to him. The house keys had gone missing. It seemed someone was watching, waiting, and perhaps even living right under their roof, completely undetected. The police investigation at the time was, by modern standards, a disaster. The crime scene was contaminated by countless neighbors and curiosity seekers. Evidence was disturbed, and the heads of the victims were even sent to Munich for examination, where they were eventually lost during World War II. Over 100 suspects were questioned over the years, but no one was ever charged. The case went cold, but the theories never stopped. Let's dive into some of those theories, starting with the most prominent suspect from the time, Lorenz Schlittenborg. He was a neighbor who had a complicated relationship with the Gruber family. He was widely believed to be the biological father of little Joseph, though Victoria's husband, Karl Gabriel, had been reported killed in World War I. Schlittenbauer had an affair with Victoria, but he refused to marry her. There were arguments over financial support for Joseph. His behavior after the discovery of the bodies was also suspicious. He was one of the first people at the scene and disturbed the bodies, claiming he was looking for his son. Some people said he seemed oddly calm, but he had an alibi of sorts, and with no concrete evidence, police could never pin it on him. Decades later, on his deathbed, he allegedly confessed to some, saying things like, "I have to carry this burden." But was it a true confession, or the ramblings of a dying man haunted by his community's tragedy? We'll never know for sure. Another theory points to Carl Gabriel, Victoria's husband. He was officially declared dead in the trenches of France in 1914. But what if he wasn't? Several people claim to have seen a man matching his description in the area after the war. Perhaps he returned to find his wife had a child with another man and, in a fit of rage, committed the murders. Some former soldiers even claimed a fellow Russian-speaking German soldier confessed to the crime. This theory is compelling, but there's no proof Carl Gabriel ever made it back to Germany. But now, let's look at this through a modern lens. In 2007, a group of German police academy students reinvestigated the case using modern forensic techniques. While they couldn't definitively solve it, they did come to a consensus on a prime suspect. Due to respect for living relatives, they've never publicly named the person, but their investigation ruled out many of the old suspects. Their analysis focused on psychological profiling. What kind of person does this? A psychopath, someone capable of extreme violence without remorse, someone who could live in an attic, listening to the family's daily routines before systematically executing them. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was planned. The killer lured them to the barn to muffle the sounds. They knew the farm's layout. They knew how to care for the animals. This points to someone familiar with the family and the farm, not a random drifter. Modern profiling suggests the killer was likely a lone male, someone with a personal motive, likely rooted in a deep-seated grudge or conflict with the family. The brutality of the attack on Andreas Gruber, who is known to be a difficult and domineering man, might suggest he was the primary target. There were also ugly rumors of abuse within the family, which could have created enemies. The idea of the man in the attic is what truly elevates this case into the realm of folklore. It taps into our primal fear of the unknown, the idea that danger can be hidden in the safest place we know, our own home. The thought of an intruder listening to your conversations, watching you sleep, is the stuff of nightmares. This is why the Hinterkaifeck story has inspired books, movies, and a century of fearful whispers. Today, the farm is long gone. It was demolished a year after the murders, as if to erase the evil that happened there. All that remains is a small memorial, but the questions linger. Who was the real killer? Was it the jilted lover, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the dead husband, Carl Gabriel, or was it someone else entirely? A dark figure who walked out of the woods, lived in their home, and then vanished back into the shadows, never to be seen again. The students who reinvestigated the case in 2007 concluded that the passage of time and the loss of evidence make it impossible to solve with 100% certainty. But their work narrowed the possibilities, pointing away from random robbers and towards someone with a deep, personal connection. They believe they know who did it, but without a confession or DNA, it remains a theory. The Hinterkaifeck murders are a terrifying reminder that sometimes the greatest monsters aren't strangers in the dark, but people we know. And sometimes the scariest stories are the true ones that have no ending. The mystery is what keeps it alive, a chilling ghost story whispered across generations in Germany and beyond. It's a perfect, unsolvable crime, and that's why, even 100 years later, we are still so completely terrified by it.